It is said that on certain coasts, in years almost forgotten, the night did not end in its usual way. Imagine, if you will, a shore wrapped in velvet darkness. The sea is a slow-breathing animal, its waves folding and unfolding against the sand with a patient hush. Above it, the sky is not black, but a deep and endless blue, like ink soaking into silk. Somewhere far out, the line of the horizon is no more than a faint suggestion, a thought rather than a boundary, a single held breath between sea and sky. Along this coast, a small village waits. Houses of stone and faded plaster lean toward the water like tired listeners, their windows shuttered against the last of the night breeze. Inside, people wake in the dim hours before dawn, as they have done for generations, guided by habit more than by light. Fires are coaxed from embers, kettles murmur, old hands reach for familiar tools. The roosters, usually loud heralds of the coming day, shift on their perches and remain strangely quiet, as if listening for something that does not arrive. On the eastern edge of the village, where the land touches the shore, a few figures stand facing the horizon. They are wrapped in cloaks and shawls, their breath turning to pale ghosts in the cool air. They know, as their parents knew, the exact shape of the morning. First a faint paling, then a soft silver line, then the first shy color along the water. They know where the light will appear, which rock on the distant headland will be gilded first, how long it takes for the sun to climb to the height of a raised hand. But this morning, the sky does not perform its remembered ritual. The horizon remains a simple line, neither dark nor light, as if the world has paused between thoughts. Time passes, counted by waves and by the quiet beating of hearts. The villagers murmur to one another, glancing at the still black shadows near their feet. The first pale ribbon of light that should slip under the door of the world is missing, as if held back behind some unseen veil. Whispers tell us that this was not a single strange dawn, but part of a long, uncertain season. In scattered chronicles, written by careful hands on brittle pages, there are notes in the margins, small marks beside the dates. They speak of mornings that came late and shy, of days when the sun never quite lifted its face above the rim of the earth. Roosters, it is said, stopped crowing at the usual hour. Sundials, once trusted like old friends, became puzzling circles of shadow, their gnomons pointing into a light too thin to leave a sharp trace. Stone and metal, faithful for so long, turned into instruments of confusion. We move gently through time, brushing against these fragile records. In a cold monastery room, a monk dips his quill in ink and pauses, his candle trembling beside him. He writes of the day of half-light, when the noon sky resembled evening, and the fields lay under a colorless gloom. In a harbor town far away, a scribe notes that lanterns were lit at midday, so that sailors might see their own hands. In a distant temple, a priest adds a quiet line to a book of prophecies, wondering if the dimness is a sign or merely the earth's brief inward breath. Was it ash in the sky lifted in secret from the mouth of a far-off mountain that breathed dust into the heavens? Was it a wandering star that came too close, veiling the sun with its ghostly cloak? Or was it a warning, inscribed in the quiet language of light, a lesson about how fragile our mornings truly are? No answer is written clearly. The ink itself seems to hesitate. The journey glides from coastal village to city wall, from temple to small simple room. In one harbor, The water lies under a soft metallic sheen. Ships rest in their moorings, their masts dark against a low silver sky. Sailors wait on the decks, their faces turned eastward, expecting to watch the sun climb the rigging as it always has, setting ropes and canvas aglow. But the sun remains behind its veil, a blurred circle, pale and withdrawn. It never quite sets fire to the tips of the waves. It is said that some sailors spoke of losing their sense of direction, not because the stars had changed, but because the rhythm of light and dark had faltered. Days blended into one another, all of them like late afternoon. Seabirds circled in confusion, unsure when to rise or rest. The bells that marked the watches still rang, but something in the meaning of time had thinned. In the inland fields, farmers watched their crops with worried eyes. Under a silver gloom that never fully lifted, wheat grew slowly, as if uncertain whether the effort was worth it. Leaves stayed dull. Fruit ripened late. Frost came early. Some believed the earth was mourning. Others said that a great shadow had passed over the world, not as punishment, but as a reminder that even the sun has its seasons of silence. We step softly into temples where incense curls in thin braids, reaching toward a sky that refuses to glow. In one ancient hall, stone columns rise like trunks of a petrified forest. High above, a gap in the roof has been carefully placed to catch the first ray of the solstice sun, to pour it like liquid gold onto an altar in the center. Priests and pilgrims gather, bare feet on cold stone, hearts beating to the slow rhythm of chanting. They have waited all night, listening for the shift in the air that always comes before dawn. But when the appointed moment arrives, the beam does not descend. The gap in the roof remains only an opening to a colorless sky. No golden shaft, no sudden warmth, no blaze of certainty upon the altar. The offerings, flowers, bread, small carved figures, sit in shadow, their colors dulled, their shapes half forgotten. A murmur moves through the gathered crowd, then fades into uneasy silence. Perhaps, some whisper, the gods have turned their faces away. Perhaps the heavens have been rearranged, their paths crossing in ways no human chart has ever captured. Or perhaps light itself is tired, needing to rest behind cloud and dust and distance. No one knows. The sacred texts offer hints, metaphors, dreams, but nothing precise. Across the sea, in another land, a different tale is told. There, the sun did rise, but not as before. It swelled red and swollen, moving slowly through a haze so thick it seemed to struggle. People watched it with fearful awe, seeing in its crimson disk the shape of an angry eye. Days there were strangely hot yet dim, as if the world sat near a fire smothered in its own smoke. In yet another place, the sun vanished behind a curtain of leaden cloud for weeks at a time. The sky became a ceiling of dull metal, featureless, without crack or seam. Rain came rarely, but the light remained sealed away, as though the world had been placed gently inside a box and forgotten on some celestial shelf. Between these accounts lives a sacred uncertainty. Stories contradict one another, yet each feels true in its own way. Perhaps the year unfolded differently in different corners of the earth. Perhaps the memory of that dim season has been colored by fear, faith, or the tender distortions of time. Or perhaps the sun's strangeness was not meant to be described with accuracy at all. only to be remembered as a feeling. A year when mornings trembled and days walked softly under a muted sky. It is in this space between tales that a forbidden thought begins to bloom, delicate as frost on a window pane. The thought that perhaps the sun itself can grow weary, not angry, not vengeful, only tired. Tired of rising in the same place, of drawing the same slow arc, of watching the same troubles unfold beneath it. Tired enough to let its light thin and falter for a brief, quiet season, to drift behind a veil and listen to the earth's whispers from a little further away. Beneath this thought lies another, gentler still, that we, who depend on light so completely, rarely consider its gift until it is altered. Only when the world woke to almost night did people feel the texture of dawn with such intensity. Notice the precise hue of the horizon, the way shadows stretch or shrink, the temperature of a sunbeam on the palm of a hand. As our chapter draws to its close, we return to the coastline where we began. The village by the water has grown used, in some small way, to this uncertain morning. People rise a little later, waiting for the faintest sign of change at the edge of the world. Children ask strange questions about why the sky feels heavy. Elders tell stories of brighter years, their voices soft, their eyes turned inward toward memories, gilded with ordinary sunshine. On this particular day, the horizon is still held like a breath. The sea, patient and grey, continues its slow conversation with the shore. Clouds gather, then thin, then gather again, like spirits unsure of where to settle. Time trickles through the village in small, quiet rituals. Bread baked, nets mended, doorways swept. Life continues, cautious but steady, under a sky that offers no guarantees. Then, almost without notice, something changes. Not a burst, not a blaze, but a subtle lifting, as though a veil of fine silk has been gently raised a finger's breadth. The horizon receives the faintest touch of light, a thin, ghostly glow that does not yet warm the skin, but softens the line between sea and sky. People look up, shading their eyes against a brightness that is scarcely there. They do not cheer. They simply breathe. The roosters murmur uncertainly, their cries half-formed. The sundials still fail to mark a clear hour, but their stone faces feel less abandoned. The villagers stand together on the shore, listening to the small sound that light makes when it returns. Not as a trumpeting herald of certainty, but as a shy guest, stepping back into a house it once knew well. And so we leave them there, on that waiting coastline, wrapped in a twilight that is slowly learning to become day again. The horizon still holds part of its breath, as if unsure how much light to release. The mystery remains unsolved. Was it ash, or a wandering star, or some deeper rhythm of the cosmos turning in its sleep? Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some seasons of darkness visit not to punish, but to teach us the shape of light by its absence. As you drift toward your own horizon of sleep, you may carry with you the image of that dim shore, that hesitant glow, that year when the sun seemed to falter, and the world, for a hushed and sacred moment, remembered how to live without the promise of gold on the water, and how to cherish it all the more when it finally returned. It is said that some questions are not written in books or spoken in words, but brushed into stone in the half-light, where breath meets dust, and time forgets its own name. Tonight, we step into such a question. Imagine a hillside in a forgotten land, where the wind moves slowly through dry grass like fingers through old hair. The sky above is a deep velvet blue, scattered with pale, patient stars. At the base of the hill, half hidden by brambles and the weary lean of age, there is an opening in the rock, a dark mouth in the earth, low and narrow, as if the world itself is exhaling a long, cool breath. This is the gate. The air that sighs from within is damp and ancient. It smells of stone, of quiet water, of smoke that burned out lifetimes ago and still remembers its own heat. If you listen closely, beneath the soft rush of the wind, you might almost hear it, the faint echo of voices long gone, woven into the walls like threads of sound. We lower ourselves inside, leaving the stars behind. The world of grass and sky narrows into a tunnel, a slow descent into the sleeping heart of the hill. Each footstep is a small crunch of grit. Each exhale is a cloud that lingers before the face, then dissolves into the dark. Light appears in the hand as a humble flame, a wick soaked in animal fat, an ember cradled in a shallow stone bowl. Its glow is tender and unsteady, licking at the cave's rough breath. It throws a thin, trembling halo onto the rock, and the shadows gather close, listening. The first thing the light finds is a hand, not a living one, pale and moving, but the ghost of a hand pressed flat in pigment. A palm and 5 splayed fingers, painted in deep ochre, as if someone long ago placed their warm flesh against the wall and dusted it with color, leaving behind the outline of their presence. Around it, more hands bloom, small and large, overlapping, reaching in different directions, like a frozen crowd leaning toward a distant fire. Whispers tell us that these hands are greetings, prayers, signatures, or silent promises not to be forgotten. Beneath the silence, they feel like breaths held in stone. The light drifts on. Shapes emerge from the dark as if waking from a dream. Herds of animals, their backs arched in motion, horns curving like crescent moons. There are lines that might be rivers, spirals that might be paths, or storms, or the turning of seasons. Circles, some full, some broken, float like small moons along the walls. Each one marked by the memory of a brush dipped in color, of fingers smudged with earth and fat. And then, deeper in, down a narrow bend that feels like the throat of the world, we come to the question. The passage tightens, the ceiling lowers. We have to bow our heads, draw our shoulders close. The flame in the shallow bowl flickers, its light caught between rough surfaces that seem to press in with their own quiet curiosity. The air grows cooler, heavier. Dust hangs in it like a faint veil. At last, the tunnel widens into a small secret chamber, no bigger than a simple room. The ceiling stoops low, and the walls curve inward, embracing the space like cupped hands. The light travels across the stone, and there, waiting, patient, undisturbed for countless winters, is the painting that holds the mystery. 2 suns, rising, one above the other, in the same sky. They are drawn in ochre and pale yellow, simple circles with lines of light spilling outward, one slightly higher, like a twin following its older brother. Beneath them, a faint line suggests a horizon, a boundary between earth and sky. The lower sun just touching that line, the upper hovering above, like a second dawn hanging in reserve. Why? In a world that has only ever known one sun, would ancient hands paint too? It is said that there was once a winter without morning, a season when the horizon stayed heavy and dim, when the light that should have spilled tenderly over the hills held back behind a thick, colourless veil, when the first sun, the real sun, faltered, its warmth too tentative, its ascent too slow. Days that felt like evenings, midnights that lingered at noon. In that dim season, we are told, people waited and waited, listening for the crack in the sky where light would pour through, and it did not come. Fires burned in their hearts, but no beam entered through the doorway. Children grew used to waking in a grey that never deepened and never lifted. The elders watched the horizon with eyes that had seen many winters and found this one different. Some believe that on such a night, deep in this very cave, they gathered. Shamans with hair braided in talismans of bone and feather. Mothers whose arms remembered the weight of restless infants. Hunters whose paths through the forest were guided by half-seen shapes. All of them carrying the same unspoken question. What happens when the world's great lamp forgets to rise? Here, in this chamber, beneath rock that muffles the outside wind, they lit their small flame. The same kind of flame we carry now, trembling at the end of a wick. Its light moved along the walls, waking the hands, the herds, the circling moons. It reached the blank curve of stone where nothing yet was painted. The air must have felt thick with breath, with worry, with the slow drum of many hearts. Then, perhaps, a hand dipped into a bowl of pigment. A circle was drawn. The first sun, as it should be, full and glowing, poised at the horizon's lip. And above it, another circle, a second dawn, imagined into being. A backup light, a hope, a wish whispered into stone. Beneath the silence, you can almost feel the intention. If the first sun fails, let there be a second. If the sky remains closed, let paint and breath and belief open another way. In a universe ruled by forces they could not name, here was something they could do. Take color, take stone, take the shape of their fear and turn it into a symbol of possibility. We drift further back into the time when these hands were warm. The cave is not a museum then, but a living chapel of rock. Smoke curls against the ceiling, leaving black whispers upon the stone. The chanting of shamans fills the chamber. Low, repetitive, more like breathing than speech. They speak to the unseen sky, to the soul of the sun, to whatever listens in the spaces between stars. Outside, the temperature bites. Snow clings to the hills, turning the world to dull silver. The horizon sits like a closed eye, refusing to open. Fires in the shelters are fed carefully, every stick of wood carrying the weight of survival. In such a world, light is not a background comfort. It is a miracle that must be courted, cajoled, coaxed back like a shy animal. In the cave, the twin suns glow in the moving flame. The people gathered there may have believed that by painting this double dawn, they could lure the real one out of hiding. That the image itself could serve as a door, a reminder, a plea. Sharpen the old memory. They touch the painting as they pass, fingers brushing the circles, leaving invisible oils that sink into the stone. Children learn the story of the double sun as a kind of lullaby, a tale of the time when the sky faltered, and people called for a second morning. Each retelling smooths the edges, turns fear into ritual, ritual into tradition. Then time, as it always does, folds itself and moves on. The winters change. The sun remembers its path. Dawn returns with more certainty. The people who painted the twin suns move away or vanish or are carried into centuries by bones and stories and dust. The cave remains, mouth half choked by fallen rock, entrance softened by moss and years. Snow falls, snow melts, grass grows, withers, grows again. Seasons repeat their quiet songs on the hillside. Beneath it all, the chamber sleeps, the twin suns floating in their stone sky, untouched by new hands, wrapped in the soft blankets of dust, snowmelt, and forgetfulness. Beneath the silence, the cave dreams. Later, much later, when language have changed, and clothes have changed, and the way people measure time has changed, others will come. They will not be shamans, but explorers. Their fire will not be a small, trembling flame of animal fat, but a cold lamp, bright and white, humming faintly with a power no ancient could have named. They will step through the same narrow mouth of rock, their boots crunching the same grit, their breath clouding in the same chill. It is said that they will talk to one another in excited whispers, notebooks ready in their hands, tools hanging at their belts. Their light will sweep across the painted walls, waking the hands, the herds, the spirals, one by one. They will measure, sketch, record. Lines and angles will be taken. Photographs will be captured, each one a moment frozen in a new kind of stone, paper, film, digital memory. When at last they reach the secret chamber, the lamp's beam will catch the twin suns. For a moment, even the most rational among them will fall silent. There is something about that double dawn, simple, almost childlike in execution, yet weighted with meaning, that resists the neat box of explanation. The explorers will murmur theories, a rare astronomical event, a halo around the sun, a mirage on the horizon, a symbolic gesture of power or rebirth. They will catalogue it as motif, as artifact, as data. They will give it a number, a label, a place in their reports. Yet somewhere beneath all of that, something sacred will refuse to be pinned down. Was the double sun a memory? Of a winter when the sky dimmed and the world learned to live with half light? Was it a prophecy of some distant age when dawn might falter again? Or was it simply a wish, whispered into stone when horizons stayed dark too long? A reminder that humans, faced with a silence they cannot bear, will paint another voice into existence. Where memory fades, mystery lingers. In the low light of their lamps, someone will reach out, perhaps without even thinking, and trace the circle lightly with a fingertip. The stone will be cool beneath their skin. The pigment, though dulled, will still cling stubbornly to the rock, surviving centuries of sleeping earth. In that small gesture, across the gulf of time, one hand will answer another. The chapter slows now, like a breath exhaled fully. The fire in our own small bowl is almost gone. The flame dips, gathers itself, flares weakly, then steadies. Shadows lengthen, creeping up the walls, folding gently over the painted hands, the animals, the circles like moons. They stroke the twin suns last of all, as if reluctant to cover them, then finally draw their cloak of darkness across the chamber. In that enveloping hush, the twin dawn remains, unseen but still there, floating in the darkness, patient as ever. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps, like all holy questions, it exists not to be answered, but to be felt. A reminder of a time when the sun refused to rise as it should, and people answered not with surrender, but with color and symbol and breath. As you close your eyes now, you may find that chamber behind them, a small stone room buried beneath layers of earth and night. The air cool, the silence kind, the memory of smoke still woven into the walls. And on one curve of rock, faint but enduring, two suns waiting at the edge of a painted horizon, one above the other. They do not argue. They do not explain. They simply rise together in that ancient sky. A twin promise etched in dust and ochre, inviting you to rest in the soft possibility that when one light falters, another can be imagined into being. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, in the cave where dawn was painted twice, those echoes are gentle, like a hand on your shoulder, guiding you slowly towards sleep, where all unanswered questions can drift, for a while, into peaceful, sacred silence. It is said that in some forgotten ages, people did not simply watch the sky. They built houses for the light. High above a restless desert, where the wind has worn the world into slow, sighing shapes, there lies a plateau of sand and stone. From below, it seems almost like the back of a sleeping animal, its spine rising gently against the horizon. The climb to its crest is long and quiet. Sand drifts across the path. The air thins. Sounds from the world below grow faint until there is only the whisper of wind and the soft rasp of breath. At the very edge of this plateau, facing the rim of the world where sky and earth meet in a line so fine it looks like a thought, stands a temple. It is not a towering palace, nor a sprawling city of pillars. It is modest, compact, precise. Every stone in its walls has been shaped by patient hands, laid in place with the measured care of those who believed that heaven itself could be persuaded by geometry. A wide staircase spills down from the entrance like a frozen waterfall, each step aligned with a particular path of the sun. Along its sides, low walls rise and fall in gentle rhythm, catching the morning's first breath, the evening's last exhale. At the top of the staircase, a gateway waits. Its stone frame is thick, simple, carved with symbols of stars, spirals, and rays. Beyond this gate lies the inner passage that leads to the sanctum. A narrow corridor whose walls are slightly angled, whose floor is gently sloped, whose ceiling opens in a single, tightly measured aperture. This temple was not built merely for worship. It was built for a moment. Once each year, at a precise breath between night and day, the sun was meant to cast a blade of light through that aperture. It would travel like a golden arrow down the length of the passage, touch the threshold, and pierce the heart of the inner chamber. There, on a waiting altar, the beam would fall, bathing sacred objects in a brief, brilliant glow. For a handful of heartbeats, the temple would be perfectly aligned with the sky itself, as if earth and heaven shook hands. It is on such a morning that we arrive. The air is cold before dawn. Sand lies pale and tired on the plateau. The sky in the east is still deep blue, but there is a lighter softness gathering along the line of the horizon. The way breath gathers before a word. Priests in linen and dust stand barefoot upon the chill stone steps. Their garments are simple, wrapped close against the wind, edges frayed with years of ceremonies. Some hold small bells, whose quiet metal murmur carries into the stillness. Others cradle bowls of incense, from which thin streams of smoke curl upward, searching the sky like questions. Below, near the base of the plateau, the people gather. They are tiny shapes from here, small clusters of color and movement against the endless sand. Faces turned eastward, hands shielding eyes, they wait for the same thing the temple waits for. That one wandering thread of light that is said to choose this place, on this day, at this moment, above all others. The priests chant softly. The words are old, worn smooth by repetition, their meaning half prayer, half memory. It is said that there was a time when this alignment never failed. Elders remember, or say they remember, mornings when the sun's ray entered as surely as a river finds the sea. Children were held up to see it. Offerings were placed where the light would touch them. Decisions were made. Oaths were sworn, treaties sealed in that fragile gold. Inside the temple, in the cool throat of the passage, the air is darker, denser, almost sacred. The inner chamber lies in shadow, its walls painted with faded stars. On the central altar, a careful arrangement of objects waits. A carved figurine, a bowl of clear water, a disc of beaten gold, a scroll wound tight around a wooden core. All of them are positioned to receive the annual blade of light. All of them stand now in a soft, expectant gloom. Outside, the horizon brightens. The first suggestions of color appear. Not the bold gold of full day, but the delicate grey lilac tint that brushes the eastern edge before anything is fully awake. The priests raise their faces. The bells ring once, twice, like the testing of a voice before a song. But the light that comes is strange. Instead of a sharp rising spear, the sun's glow spreads in a thin, diffused sheet. The sky brightens at an odd angle, as if the sun is sliding along a path slightly askew, hesitant. Clouds, pale and nearly transparent, have gathered like a veil over the rim, their edges luminous but soft. The sun, still below the horizon, sends its rays not cleanly through the aperture, but scattered across the sky, grazing the plateau in a way no one expected. On the threshold of the temple, the line of shadow does not retreat as it should. The beam that has, for years uncounted, shot down the passage like a narrow prophecy, fails to appear. The inner sanctum, prepared, swept, anointed, remains unlit. Inside, the sacred objects glimmer faintly in the ambient gloom, touched only by the shy reflected light that seeps in from the outer world. The gold disc is not ignited into brilliance. It only hints at what it could be. The bowl of water does not burn with sun. It holds instead a dim echo of the doorway. The scroll lies wrapped in shadow, its ink waiting for a ray that does not arrive. In that moment, something more than a ritual falters. Was their God displeased? Had some offering been forgotten, some song sung incorrectly? Or had the heavens themselves changed their ancient rhythm? There is no thunder, no disaster. The day unfolds, quietly, almost politely. The sun lifts at last above the horizon, but too high, too angled, for its light to enter the temple as it has always done. The sky turns from lilac to pale gold, the wind warms, the people below go about their tasks. Life continues. Only the temple, sitting on its high plateau like a stone question, bears witness to the subtle wrongness that has entered the world. The unraveling of meaning begins not with panic, but with silence. For many days after, the priests walk the staircase in slow, measured steps. They stand in the passage at different hours, tracing with their fingers the edges of light on the walls. They mark where shadow falls in the morning, at midday, at evening. They record the angles of brightness with bits of charcoal on plaster, sketching a quiet map of where the sun now chooses to touch their stone. In clay tablets, they note the day and the hour of the failed alignment. They compare it with older records, etched in the same careful script by long-gone hands. The older tablets speak confidently. On this day, the light enters the heart. The newer ones whisper, on this day the light did not arrive. Whispers rise among the elders. Some argue that the ritual has been broken and therefore the heavens have turned away. They speak of stricter offerings, of purer songs, of heavier incense. They suggest that the inner chamber itself must be cleansed more thoroughly, that whatever thin dust has settled there might have offended the invisible listener above. Others, quieter, but no less certain, suggest something more unsettling. That the sky itself has shifted, that the path of the sun has changed by a breath, by the width of a finger, by an angle too small to see, yet large enough to move the sacred beam away from the aperture. If the sky has moved, they murmur, then the temple, built to meet it, has been left behind. Years pass. The temple endures dry seasons and sudden storms. Sand blows against its steps, piling in soft drifts at the base of the walls. Sometimes, in the evenings, the last light of day slips strangely along its stones, catching the carvings of spirals and star marks in unexpected ways, as if the sky is experimenting with new paths. Within, the sacred chamber continues to wait. Each year, on the appointed morning, the rituals are enacted again. The bells ring. Incense curls upward. The people gaze toward the eastern rim, and each year the priests stand in the passage, hearts poised between hope and acceptance, watching to see whether the wandering light will return to its old course or continue on its new. Sometimes the beam comes close. On certain years, the sun's ray enters the gateway more generously, casting a partial light into the corridor. The floor brightens, the walls glow, yet the final step, that small but crucial line of brilliance reaching the altar, still fails. It falls short by the width of a hand. It lands too high, too low, too soon, too late. Each time there are new measurements, new marks on clay, new debates under torchlight. Adjust the temple, some suggest. Carve the aperture wider. Shift the angle of the passage. Move the altar closer to the light's new path. If the sky has changed, we must change with it. Stone can be cut again, they say. Geometry can bend. But others are afraid. If they alter what their ancestors built, will they sever the line that connects them to the old certainty? If they chase the wandering light too eagerly, will they lose the memory of the path it once took? There is a reverence not only for the light, but for the original intention. To adjust the temple feels, to some, like admitting that the universe does not hold still for human plans. And so, for a long time they do both and neither. Small changes are made, careful experiments carved into plaster and stone, then abandoned. A secondary niche is cut into the wall to catch the new angle of light, but it is never formally sanctified. The old altar remains. The old alignment is still spoken of in the present tense, as if naming it might call it back. Records in clay and on hammered gold plates begin to tell the story in a new way. On one tablet, an elder scribe notes, "This year, the shadow at midday was longer than in the days of my father. The sun stands lower in the sky." On another, written decades later, midday has shrunk and evening comes as a quiet guest, slipping in before we have finished our tasks. Gold ornaments once worn by high priests are etched with small, almost hidden marks, tiny spirals beside the symbol of the sun, as if acknowledging its new, uncertain path. In their stories told to children, the people begin to speak of a time when the heavens paused, when the great light hesitated in its journey. The temple, through all this, stands and watches. Stone is patient. It does not hurry. It records without judgment. Each day, shadows slide across its surfaces, lengthening and shrinking in their adjusted rhythm. Its staircase feels the pressure of countless feet, hopeful and resigned. Its chamber holds prayers whispered into an unlit space, offerings laid upon an altar that now receives only the soft, indirect glow of reflected dawn. Beneath the silence, the question remains: was their God displeased? Had the people failed some unseen test? Or is this simply the way of the sky moving in slow, cosmic spirals beyond the reach of human calendars and careful alignments? Some nights, when the desert wind is still, and the stars burn like quiet witnesses above the plateau, one might imagine the priests standing in the inner chamber, long after the rituals have ended, alone with their thoughts. It is cold there in the dark. The smell of incense lingers, faint and comforting. The gold disc on the altar reflects a ghost of starlight from the narrow opening above, but no sunbeam. The scroll, now worn at the edges, rests like a sleeping thought. In that hush, the chill is not just in the air but in the heart. The realization that even stone-built certainties can be undone by a single missing ray. That a structure aligned to the sky can find itself, one quiet morning, slightly out of tune with the heavens it reveres. Perhaps, the priests think, the temple was never meant to grasp the sun forever. Perhaps it was a conversation, not a command. A brief agreement between earth and sky that has now shifted, as all agreements eventually do. We do not know what conclusion they reached, or if they reached one at all. The temple remains on its high plateau, a stone witness to a celestial hesitation, long after the last priest has left, long after the language of its inscriptions has faded from living tongues. It waits. It waits through dawns that blaze and dawns that falter, through seasons when the sun climbs high and proud, and others when it drags its light across the horizon with weary grace. And in the dream time of night, when you close your eyes, you may find yourself standing in that unlit chamber, surrounded by offerings that wait without answer. Your bare feet on cool stone, your breath slow weighted, your heart listening. There is no clear reply from the sky above, only the soft memory of a blade of light that once came, once chose this place, and then wandered on. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, perhaps, you can rest in the gentle uncertainty, in the knowledge that even temples aligned to the very path of the sun must one day relearn their place beneath the changing sky, and that it is all right, not to know whether to move the stones, or simply to stand inside them and watch the light drift by. As sleep approaches, let the image remains, a staircase on a high plateau leading to a shadowed doorway, a chamber, cool and expectant, an altar waiting for a wandering ray. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun, following paths we have never fully understood, tracing its slow, eternal arc. While the temple and the heart within it, quietly, reverently, continues to wait. It is said that in a certain valley, where the river moves like a slow thought, and the fog rises each morning like incense from an unseen altar, there once stood a city that watched the sky more carefully than any other. The valley was narrow and long, cupped gently between hills the color of old clay. At dawn, the river breathed mist into the streets, soft and pale, wrapping stone and wood in a damp silver veil. Bells hung from slender towers, their voices low and patient, calling the day not with urgency but with a kind of reverent curiosity, as if each morning were a guest who might or might not arrive. This was the city of watchers. From almost every rooftop, a slender tower rose into the mist, some high and graceful, some stout and simple, all crowned with a small shelter open to the sky. In each of these towers, at the faintest hint of light, someone would stand, cloaked figures, still and listening, their eyes turned toward the eastern rim of the valley. They watched for the first change in color, the first soft bruising of the darkness, the first suggestion that night was beginning to loosen its grip. For generations, they had done this. At the center of the city, in a hall lined with stone and quiet, lay the tablets. Sheltered from rain and wind, they rested on low shelves, rows upon rows of clay, baked hard by time, each one bearing thin lines carved by careful hands. One line for each dawn. The ritual was simple. When the first watcher saw daylight touch the highest point of the eastern hills, a bell would sound. A small one at first, its tone clear and pure. Then another, and another, until the city's towers rang in agreement. Down in the hall of stone, a scribe would lean over a wet tablet and draw a single line with a stylus, straight and sure. One more morning, counted. One more thread in a long, unbroken tapestry of days. The city did not merely live through its mornings. It recorded them, held them, honored them. To the people who lived there, the return of the sun was more than a fact. It was a promise, renewed again and again, and their thin marks in clay were the quiet signatures of that promise kept. Whispers tell us that for a very long time, the pattern never faltered. Then, in one particular year, the year the elders later called the year of doubtful dawn, the marks began to waver. It began softly, the way a change often does. One morning, the eastern hills stayed dark longer than expected. The watchers, standing in their tower rooms, shifted their weight, rubbed warmth into their hands, and waited. The sky, instead of gently brightening, took on a dull, heavy color, like bruised fruit. When light finally came, it was a weak, sallow glow that seemed to hesitate at the ridgeline, unwilling to fully enter the valley. Some of the towers rang their bells late. Others, uncertain, did not ring at all. Down in the stone hall, the scribe paused. His stylus hovered over the soft clay. He had always drawn a full line when dawn arrived, neat and firm, stretching across the tablet like a horizon. Now he hesitated. This was not quite night, but not fully morning. The river mist lay thicker than usual. Shadows did not behave as they should. After a moment, he drew the line anyway, but shorter, as if the day were only half born. The next morning, The clouds were thick as wool. They rested low over the valley, so close that the towers seemed to pierce them like needles. No clear light could be seen. The sky lightened slightly, but never broke into color, never showed the thin, clean edge of the sun. Some watchers argued that dawn had come after all, or the darkness had thinned a little. Others insisted it had not. To them, morning was not a matter of degree, but of presence. Either the sun was seen, or it was not. The bells rang unevenly, some in doubt, some in faith. In the tablet hall, the scribe added a small symbol beside that day's faint mark. A circle with a tiny notch. Not a full dawn. Not a true night. Something in betweenness or unnamed. As the year unfolded, more mornings behaved strangely. Some arrived as dim bruised light, without clear sunrise. Others slipped past unseen, swallowed completely by veils of cloud and drifting ash that nobody could trace back to a visible source. The hills lost their clean silhouettes. The sky often resembled a metal lid placed over the valley, cold and featureless. The watcher's tablets began to fill with variations. Full lines for the rare mornings that appeared clean and bright. Broken lines for those that were doubtful. Beside the broken ones, new symbols appeared. Dots, crescents, spirals. Small stars marked and crossed out again. A language of uncertainty etched into clay. Beneath the silence of their work, careful confusion grew. Elders were summoned. In shaded rooms, smelling of dust and resin, they unrolled old scrolls, their edges frayed, their ink faded to the color of dried leaves. They spread star maps across heavy tables, circles within circles, lines tracing the paths of wandering lights across the night sky. Fingers traced routes of planets, remembered alignments, eclipses recorded in the old style. The sun was eaten, the day was stolen, the birds fell quiet. Had this happened before? Some believed they had found hints of it. Cryptic notes at the edges of ancient texts, days without morning, light withheld, the sky's forgotten breath. These fragments were like echoes heard through a thick wall, suggestive but unclear. Others shook their heads and said no, the world was ending, slowly and politely. Not with fire, not with flood, but with a shrinking of mornings, a thinning of light. We are watching the last dawns, they murmured. We are counting what remains. In forgotten corners of the city, beneath archways and in the shade of vine-covered walls, people whispered of sources beyond the valley. Perhaps far-off mountains had spit ash into the sky. Perhaps the gods had turned their faces away. Perhaps the sun was simply tired. Life, however, continued. It always does, even under a hesitant sky. In the half-light, markets still opened, their awnings sagging slightly under the weight of damp mist. Merchants lit lanterns at noon, their warm circles of gold hovering over baskets of grain and jars of oil. Coins glinted dully, reflecting lantern flame more than daylight. Buyers and sellers spoke in softer voices, as if the dimness were a guest sitting among them and listening. Children played in courtyards that never fully brightened. Their laughter floated up into the grey air, not quite matched by the light above. They chased one another around wells, tossed small carved toys, drew lines in the dust, tiny imitations of the marks on the official tablets. A full line for a good game, a broken one when someone had to go home too early. Priests climbed the steps of their temples, stood before altars that faced the shifting sky, and chanted verses that had been spoken for centuries. Their words rose into a space that answered with muted silver. No clear rays broke through. Yet they continued, their voices steady, honoring a covenant that felt more fragile than before. In the watching towers, arguments softened into quiet contemplation. Some watchers kept strict to the old rules. They would not ring the bell unless they saw the sun itself, or at least the sharp outline of its light, touch the crest of the hills. Others allowed themselves more generosity. If the dark lessened, if the valley could be seen in soft outline, they considered it dawn enough. The Hall of Tablets became a mirror of these disputes. Some days were marked boldly, others shyly, others only hinted at. In a single row of clay, the rhythm faltered. Full line, broken line, no line at all. Next to the absences, small symbols appeared, like question marks in an ancient hand. Histories began to contradict one another. One chronicler, writing from the upper district near the Temple Hill, insisted that the strange dimness had lasted only a season. The mornings were troubled, he wrote, but they passed like a brief illness. The sun returned to its strength. Yet another, living down by the river where the mist lay thickest, recorded something different. For years, she wrote, our dawns were uncertain. The children grew older in a world that never fully brightened. We lit lamps to teach them their letters. The distance between night and day seemed to thin. Which memory was true? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Where memory fades, stories fill the gaps, curling around the absence like smoke. In that valley, beneath that veiled sky, truth and perception braided together as tightly as river reeds. Beneath the silence, the question deepened. Was the world ending in slow motion? Or was this the face of a cycle never taught? A hidden rhythm in which the sun, every few lifetimes, retreats slightly, breathing in while the earth waits? Some believe the tablets themselves held the answer. They walked the halls slowly, fingers hovering just above the clay. Each line was a day, each tablet a season. A wall of them, stacked and ordered, was a lifetime of mornings, recorded like the pulse of a patient measured with infinite care. If they could only read the rhythm, perhaps they could see the pattern, a subtle rising and falling of light across centuries, along celestial tide. Others said that no tablet, no scroll, could ever truly capture the will of the sky. To count the mornings, they whispered, was both wise and foolish. Wise, because it taught gratitude. Foolish, because it gave the illusion of control. It is said that in those days, some watchers began to add not only lines, but also tiny stars beside certain dawns. Those that arrived after long absences. Those that seemed brighter than expected. Those that felt like small miracles. Marked by the moon, by cloud, by heart. Data and devotion pressed into the same slab of earth. Years slipped by. The sky continued its quiet variations. Sometimes a month of dim dawns would be followed by a week of sudden clarity, when the valley seemed to drink light with desperate joy. Sometimes a single morning would burst into gold after many pale ones, and people would stand in the streets, faces lifted, eyes closed, just breathing. In time, the sharp fear of the early strange days softened. The city learned to live with uncertainty, to fold it into its rituals. Lanterns remained handy even in high summer. Stories of the missing mornings became part of the education of children, told in the same tone as legends of floods and comets and long-ago kings. Still the tablets multiplied. Each new dawn, or almost dawn, was recorded. The thin marks accumulated like rings in a tree, like layers of sediment at the bottom of the river. If one looked closely, patterns might be guessed at, but never fully grasped. The valley aged. Stones wore down. Towers leaned. Some watchers grew old at their posts, their eyes clouding even as the sky above them did. New generations climbed the stairs to take their place, stylus in hand, listening for the first bell that would tell them how to draw the next day into being. And so we arrive at the last scene, in a year that is neither the brightest nor the darkest. A year like many others, and yet not quite. The sun has been inconsistent again. Some mornings have come strong and clear. Others have been smothered in cloud, letting only a dull wash of grey seep into the streets. The watchers are no closer to agreement than their ancestors were. In the hall of tablets, a new slab of clay lies waiting, smooth and damp, smelling faintly of rain and earth. A watcher stands over it, stylus resting lightly between finger and thumb. They have stood in their tower at the edge of dawn, watching the horizon. What they saw was not simple at all. The darkness did soften. The eastern hills emerged from shadow as faint silhouettes. But no distinct sun appeared. No clean edge of light. The valley slipped from night into a pallid half-state. Lamps are lit in the houses. Birds call uncertainly. The bells in the towers ring, but hesitantly, as if unsure of their own voices. Now, in the hall, the watcher must decide. What kind of mark does this morning deserve? A full line would be a declaration. Yes, this was a dawn. A broken one would be a confession. We are still not sure. The stylus touches the clay. For a moment, it does not move. The watcher's hand trembles just enough to leave a tiny indentation, a seed of decision not yet grown. You can almost hear their thoughts. What is a day? Is it the coming of light? Or the turning of hours? Is it our perception? Or the sun's intention? If we name this a morning, does that make it so? If we do not, will the sky notice? Finally, the stylus begins to move. Not quickly, not boldly. It drags a line slowly across the surface, the pressure changing as doubt flows through the hand. The result is neither perfectly straight nor completely broken, something between a mark with a faint tremor in its middle, like a breath caught in the throat. The watcher lifts the stylus and studies the line. It is both a record and a question, a testament not only to what the sky did, but to how the heart received it. The tablet will be left to dry. The valley's air, scented with river mist and smoke, will harden it into permanence. That hesitant line, pressed in a moment of quiet conflict, will endure long after the watchers and their towers have dissolved into dust. Future eyes, if any remain to read it, may argue about its meaning. Was that day counted as a full dawn, or as a missing morning? No legend will answer. Only the silent clay will speak, and even then, only in the soft language of ambiguity. Perhaps it was never meant to be known. As you drift towards sleep, you might imagine walking through that valley, through streets never fully bright, past towers that still lift their faces to the sky. You might hear the distant chime of a bell, slow and low, like a heart wondering whether this, too, is a true beginning. Beneath the silence, the city still counts. Not to control the sun, but to remind itself that light, When it comes, when it doesn't, when it merely hints, it's always worth noticing. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, let this be one of them. The quiet voice of a city that counted the missing mornings, and in doing so, discovered the fragile, sacred tension between memory and the sky's unspoken will. It is said that in a land of many rivers and many roofs, there was once an emperor who believed that the sky itself could be persuaded to obey. His palace sat at the heart of his world, surrounded by high walls the color of dried blood and old cinnabar. Within those walls, courtyards unfolded like quiet dreams. Rectangles of raked gravel, small gardens of moss and stone, ponds that held the moon as delicately as a bowl holds water. The air was thick with the scent of lacquered wood, ink, and the faint ghost of incense that had burned for centuries in hidden corners. On most nights, the palace rested in a hush of moonlight, its tiled roofs glowing softly under the stars. Lanterns shone at gateways like patient eyes, watching the corridors where painted screens whispered of mountains and cranes and drifting clouds. Servants moved like shadows. Guards stood like statues. The emperor, in theory, slept. But tonight, he does not. Before dawn, while the world still lies wrapped in a dark indigo veil, the emperor walks. His footsteps are soft against the polished floors, his presence known more by the quiet pressure he leaves in the air than by any sound. He passes beneath beams carved with dragons and clouds, under rafters that have watched generations of rulers come and go. The screens along his path are painted with bright scenes, golden fields under radiant suns, mornings that seem to sing from within the silk. He pauses in front of them, and for the first time, the paintings feel like lies. He has been told that the sun has weakened, that in the provinces, the farmers now stand at the edges of their fields and see only a colorless sky thick with pale cloud and drifting ash. That dawn, once a swift and certain promise, now arrives late, reluctant, with a light that feels bruised and shy. That shadows, once sharp and sure, have blurred into something uncertain. His advisors bring reports written in neat black strokes. The mornings are dim. The crops are slow. The people are afraid. He has read them all. He has read them in the quiet hours when the candles burn low and the palace grows cold. Tonight, he wears a robe embroidered with golden rays, each thread carefully laid to mimic the strength of a rising sun. The garment was meant to reflect the sky's blessing, to mirror its power. But now, beneath the faded stars and thinning moon, the robe feels heavy, its brilliance out of place in a world that has forgotten how to brighten. He comes at last to a gate facing east. It is a carved gateway, tall and solemn, set into the outermost wall of the palace. Beyond it, a broad terrace opens toward the horizon. The gate's pillars are etched with ancient characters. Words for light, for dawn, for renewal. Dragons coil in low relief along the lintel, their stone bodies turned toward the place where the first light should appear. The emperor stops before this gate. The night air is cold against his face. Above the dark line of the distant hills, the sky is beginning to pale, but only slightly like breath on glass. No color yet. No fire. Only a dull gray that could belong to any hour. He stands in silence for a long moment, listening. Beneath the quiet, the palace breathes, faint rustles of fabric, the sleeping sighs of courtyards and koi ponds, the slow turning of the earth itself. something inside him tightens. If the heavens have forgotten their duty, he thinks, then I will remind them. He is, after all, the Son of Heaven. That is what the records say. Armies move at the stroke of his brush. Rivers are redirected by his decrees. Mountains are carved with his name. If any mortal has the right to address the sky to demand its attention, surely it is he. When he turns away from the gate, the air seems colder. In chambers lit by oil lamps, edicts are written. Ink as dark as midnight flows from soft brushes onto thick paper, each stroke deliberate, each character a quiet command. The emperor's words travel down the length of the page like a river of will. He orders that at every riverbank, the fishermen will kneel before dawn, faces to the east, casting offerings of rice and fragrant herbs into the water as the first flicker of light appears. He commands that in mountain shrines, monks will stand barefoot in the snow at the edge of precipices, breathing mist and incense, chanting verses older than the empire itself to remind the hidden sun of its sacred path. He decrees that in every city, on every tower and at every gate, bells will be hung and rung at the precise breath when dawn should come, their sound rising like a net of echo to catch the reluctant light and pull it into the day. The edicts leave the palace like birds released at once. Messengers on swift horses carry them out through painted gates and along frozen roads, over bridges that arch like the backs of sleeping dragons, through villages huddled under pale skies. Whispers tell us that when the proclamations arrive, people feel a mixture of comfort and unease. To some, the emperor's concern is reassuring. The highest poor in the land has seen what they have seen, felt what they have felt. Their dim mornings have been acknowledged. Something is being done. To others, there is a more subtle fear. If the emperor must command the sunrise, they think, then the world is surely more broken than we imagined. Still, the rituals begin. At riverbanks veiled in early fog, fishermen set aside their nets for a moment and kneel on damp sand. Baskets of offerings sit beside them, small portions of their own food, a curl of resin, a strip of cloth dyed in precious color. As the eastern sky begins its slow, uncertain brightening, they bow their heads and send their prayers out over the water, where the pale reflection of the horizon trembles. In mountain shrines, where stone steps climb into clouds, monks in simple robes stand in the snow before stone altars. Their breath plumes in front of them, joining the incense smoke that coils up into the thin air. Their chants are low and steady, almost indistinguishable from the sound of the wind. In cities, on towers and roofs and walls, bells hang like quiet moons. At the hour calculated by court astronomers, they are struck. Their voices rise across tiled rooftops and narrow alleys. From one district to another, a trembling chorus of metal calling the sky. For a moment, it seems as though the world holds its breath. And yet, dawn does not change its mind. The mornings remain thin and reluctant. The sky persists in its muted silver. Sometimes the sun emerges as a faint disk, pale as worn coin, its light weak and wandering. Other times it hides entirely behind veils of cloud, its presence felt only as a vague swelling of brightness that never solidifies into a clear edge. The fields, far from the palace, sit under this colorless canopy. Farmers' hands move through soil that feels colder than it should. Seedlings strain upward toward a light that cannot quite decide whether it wishes to bless them. Children learn to recognize the hours not by the angle of shadows, but by the toll of bells and the rhythm of chores. Back in the walled palace, where lacquer still shines and painted screens still glow with scenes of a more generous sky, the emperor waits for reports. They come in bundles, tied with silk cords, scrolls covered in neat characters, star maps marked with careful dots, notes from border outposts and temple precincts. His astrologers bring charts that show small shifts in celestial paths. His poets bring verses that attempt to soothe. His dream interpreters bring stories gathered from sleeping minds across the empire. One astrologer speaks of past cycles, traced in fragile documents found in mold-scented boxes deep in the archive. There were times, he says, bowing low, when the light thinned, when the mornings grew strange, yet the sky did not fall. After some years, balance returned. A poet, his voice trembling like a string on a lute, recites an old legend. It tells of a sun that sometimes closes its eyes, not out of anger, but out of sorrow. In those seasons, the legend says, the sun hides its face, dimming its fire to better hear the whispers of the earth below, the grief of the trees, the sighing of rivers, the quiet tears of people who think no one is listening. Beneath the silence, the poet murmurs, the heavens are listening. The dream interpreters share visions of a great golden eye clouded by mist, of a vast, endless curtain drawn partly across the sky, of children standing on hills, hands outstretched, their faces lit by a light that comes from nowhere and everywhere at once. The emperor listens. His robe of embroidered rays rests heavy around his shoulders. The golden threads have begun to feel like a burden, a promise he cannot fulfill. He can send soldiers to quell rebellions. He can command laborers to build bridges, walls, roads that tie his empire together like threads in a tapestry. He can summon grain from one region to feed another. But he cannot move the veil of cloud from the face of the sky. It is a realization that comes slowly, like dawn on these strange mornings. Still, he does not give up easily. He fine-tunes the edicts. The bells must ring more precisely. The prayers must be recited with greater unity. Their words aligned like stars in a constellation. The ceremonies at the temples become more elaborate. The steps more formal. The offerings more costly. In a hidden courtyard, where an ancient tree spreads its bare branches like ink drawings against the pale sky, the emperor walks alone. Leaves, fallen and dry, crunch faintly beneath his boots. If I cannot change the sun, he thinks, though he does not say it aloud, perhaps I can at least show it we have not abandoned our side of the covenant. But morning after morning, the pattern holds. The empire kneels, chants, rings, offers, remembers. The sun continues to rise in its own way, late, hesitant, veiled. Days fold into months. The dim season lingers. People grow used to living in a world where light is less certain, less bright. They learn to work by lantern glow, to harvest by muted noon. They tell each other stories of brighter days, not only as laments, but as promises that such days might come again. Where memory fades, they say, hope must take its place. The emperor ages, though slowly, beneath these pale skies. Lines mark his face like delicate calligraphy. His hair, once black as the ink used to write his decrees, begins to carry threads of silver. When he looks into the mirror, he sometimes sees not a ruler, but a man standing between forces larger than himself, the earth beneath his feet, the sky above, and the fragile lives in between. Eventually, there comes another morning. The sky before dawn is familiar in its uncertainty. Dark, then slightly less dark, then bruised with faint grey. The emperor, once again, walks the corridors of lacquered wood. His footsteps echo softly along the painted screens. But his robe tonight is simpler. The garment of blazing rays hangs elsewhere, its gold dulled by disuse. He wears a plain, heavy cloth, warm against the lingering chill. He comes once more to the eastern gate. The carved dragons still face the horizon. The ancient words for light and renewal still rest in the stone, though their edges have softened. The terrace beyond the gate is empty, the world beyond sleeping beneath its grey blanket. He stands there, hands folded within his sleeves, and waits. No bells ring in the palace yet. No voices disturb the air. In this moment, there is only the faint rustle of his breathing and the slow, unseen spinning of the earth. The horizon begins to pale, not dramatically, not in a blaze of sudden colour, just a gradual thinning of the darkness, the kind he has watched for years now. Clouds sit low, layered like silk drapes, their undersides tinged with a colour that might be called gold, if one were generous, or might be called nothing at all if one were stern. Slowly, a disk appears. The sun, shy and washed out, shows itself. A coin spent too often, its image worn. It rises, but not triumphantly, its edges blurred by the ever-present veil. The emperor feels something shift inside him. This light is not the light of the pendants he wears, nor of the paintings on the palace walls. It does not match the symbols carved into his throne or sewn into his banners. It is thinner, quieter, less eager to please. He realizes, in that stillness, that it is not his to command. It never was. He can decree. He can arrange. He can call his people to kneel and sing and ring the bells at the appointed time. But whether the sun answers with a generous blaze or a half-hearted glow is not a decision that bends to ink or gold or power. The sky has its own will, woven into patterns too vast to fit on any scroll. He does something he has not done before. He bows his head, not to his courtiers, not to his ancestors whose names are written on lacquered tablets in incense-filled halls, but to the pale veiled disk lifting itself over the distant hills, and to the mystery behind it. Beneath the silence of that act lies a new understanding, that some forces can be partnered with, perhaps, but not commanded, that there is a humility in witnessing what one cannot change, a kind of reverence that does not draw its strength from control. The washed-out sunrise continues its slow ascent. The terrace grows lighter in its tentative glow. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, fishermen rise, monks breathe in the cold, children rub sleep from their eyes. Life, as always, stirs and moves beneath whatever light is given. The emperor straightens, the cold air filling his lungs, his robe heavy but no longer pretending to be the sun. He stands, not as one who rules the dawn, but as one who shares it with everyone else. Perhaps it was never meant to be any other way. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, it may be the voice of a pale wandering sun saying gently, "I will rise as I can. Your task is not to command me, but to live beneath my light, however faint, with as much grace as you are able. And as you drift toward your own horizon of sleep, you might carry with you that image, an emperor at an eastern gate, his head bowed before a shy, imperfect sunrise, a figure of great power learning at last to stand quietly, simply watching. As the sky keeps its own counsel, and the day, such as it is, quietly begins. It is said that if you travel far enough north, beyond the last line of ploughed fields and the final smoke of village chimneys, you come to a world where sound is muffled and time walks on snow. There, mountains rise like sleeping beasts under heavy blankets of ice, their backs rounded, their ridges softened by centuries of storm. The wind moves through their passes with a low, chanting voice, carrying crystals of frozen breath that glitter faintly even in the thinnest light. Valleys lie sealed in silence, rivers turn to glass, forests etched in white and charcoal. On the edge of one such valley, clinging to a cliff above a frozen river, stands a lonely monastery. Its walls, built of dark stone hauled up from the valley floor, lean inward as if huddling together for warmth. Roofs sag under the weight of snow, curved tiles half buried, their edges crusted with frost. Wooden doors creak softly in the cold, hinges worn smooth by winters long forgotten. From a distance, the monastery looks like a small outpost of human will pressed against the vast, indifferent stone of the mountain. Inside, however, a different world lives. Corridors smell of beeswax and old wood. Worn floorboards hold the memory of countless soft footsteps. Candlelight breathes along whitewashed walls, its glow catching on icons painted in patient colors. Stars, halos, clouds. A sun rendered in pure gold leaf. In tiny cells, simple beds, folded blankets, and shelves of hand-copied books in all wait in orderly stillness. This place is accustomed to long nights and brief, fragile days. The monks who live here know the language of twilight, the way the world turns blue before dark, the way the first hint of dawn stains the snow with a shy silver. They understand that in this high, cold land, daylight often comes not as a bursting flame, but as a soft exhale. They have learned to measure the seasons not by warmth, but by the shade of the sky and the angle of shadows against the cliff. At the heart of the monastery rises a bell tower. Not a grand spire, but a simple square structure, built of the same dark stone as the rest, yet reaching just enough above the roofline to speak directly to the sky. Within it hangs a single great bell, its surface dulled by frost and the touch of countless winters. Around its rim are carved small stars and curling patterns like spirals of smoke. It has one duty. Each morning, at the very first hint of light, when the horizon begins to soften from black to deep blue, the bell is to ring, not in celebration, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement. The night has loosened its hold, and a new day has placed its foot upon the threshold. For years, for decades, perhaps longer than the memory of any living monk, that rhythm has held. Then, one winter, something changes. The chapter of this story begins with a moment that should be ordinary. A monk in a heavy wool robe climbs the narrow steps of the bell tower. His breath emerges in small ghostly clouds. His fingers, beneath their leather gloves, are numb with the cold, but trained by habit. He reaches the small arched window that faces east and peers out. It is the hour before dawn. Usually, at this time, he would see a faint line along the horizon, a whisper of pale blue or grey rising slowly behind the jagged teeth of the distant mountains. But tonight, the sky remains the colour of coal, dense, unyielding, a deep black that does not admit even the suggestion of change. Still, he waits. Minutes pass. The wind presses at the window, its breath thin and sharp. The snow on the valley floor glows faintly with reflected starlight. But the kind of light that belongs to morning is absent. He consults the water clock by the wall, its slow dripping already measured and known. It tells him the time when dawn should be approaching. The rules say, at the first hint. He searches again. Nothing. And yet, he knows that even in this strange winter, the world must be turning. Somewhere beyond the heavy clouds he cannot see, the sun must be moving towards its appointed place. Whether it reaches them fully or not, the hour has come. He raises the striker. The bell tolls once, twice, 3 times. Its sound deep and resonant, a low bronze voice trembling into a sky that remains unchanged. The note spreads out over the frozen river, climbs the slopes of the sleeping mountains, and dissolves into the distance. Below, in their cells, the monks hear it. They rise, pull on robes, step into the darkness that feels thicker than it should. Their breath curls around them as they file into the chapel, guided not by morning light, but by an unending midnight. Later, they record the time in careful script. On a long sheet of rough paper, the bellkeeper draws a line and writes, "The bell rang, the sky did not lighten." He notes the hour marked by the dripping clock, adds the temperature as best he can guess it, and beside this, a tiny symbol, a small circle filled in with black. One day like this would not be unusual. Storms, after all, come and go. But the next morning, and the next, and the next, the scene repeats itself. The bell rings at the appointed hour, but the sky remains dark. It is not entirely empty. Stars still glimmer faintly above, and sometimes a pale, diffuse glow seems to gather far to the south, as if dawn has lost its way and risen somewhere else. Yet here, above the frozen river and the clinging monastery, the night refuses to loosen. We move room to room, cell to cell, as the monks begin to murmur among themselves in hushed voices. In the refectory, where simple meals of bread and root vegetables are shared in near silence, spoons pause midway between bowl and mouth as each man listens to the quality of the dark pressing against the small frosted windows. In the library, where shelves sag under the weight of old books bound in leather and cloth, a few brothers gather around a table. They spread out charts of the sky drawn by hands long dead, maps of stars and the paths of wandering lights, records of eclipses and once-in-a-century comets. Their fingers trace lines and trying to understand whether what they are seeing is part of some forgotten cycle or something entirely new. Has the sun wandered away? One asks, voice scarcely more than breath. Or does it hide? Another wonders. Behind a curtain of the storms we cannot see. At night, if it can be called night when it stretches on without edge, they light extra candles. The flames, small and determined, are a quiet rebellion against the unbroken dark outside. Wax pools at the base of brass holders, hardens, is chipped away, and begins again. The light they make is modest, but it is theirs. Outside the monastery walls, the snow takes on an otherworldly glow. It is not bright, but neither is it fully dark. A faint bluish sheen rests on its surface, as though the snow itself remembers light that never quite arrived. Beneath the silence, the land holds a secret radiance. Travelers, though few in this harsh season, still occasionally find their way to the monastery gates. Wrapped in furs stiff with frost, faces red with cold, they bring news from the south. Their stories fit together like shards from different vessels. None complete, all unsettling. In one village, they say, noon looks like early evening. People go about their work under a dim grey canopy, never seeing the sun's face, only the direction of a slightly lighter part of the sky. In another region, strange auroras dance across the heavens. Curtains of green and violet fire that crackle and sway, painting fields and forests in ghostly colors. Cows refuse to leave their barns. Children wake from uneasy dreams and ask why the sky has descended to the ground. Further still, there are rumors of fire on distant horizons. Not the gentle orange of hearths, but huge sullen glows that pulse against the edge of the world, as if mountains themselves are burning from within. The monks listen. They nod. They write. In the monastery's chronicle, a large leather-bound book that sits in a stone alcove near the chapel, they begin to add these accounts. Each entry is careful, its letters formed slowly, its tone restrained. Still, beneath the calm strokes of ink lies a trembling awareness. The world beyond their cliff is also wrapped in this strange not quite night. One brother records an observation of the snow's blue sheen, suspecting some hidden starlight at work. Another notes a dream in which he sees the sun as a weary traveler, sitting down at the edge of a forest, head bowed, hands clasped around its own warmth. Another writes simply, the bell marks the hours, but the hours no longer have names. Days, or what they still call days, drift past. The water clock continues to drip. The bell continues to toll at measured intervals. Its sound the only reliable measure of time in a sky without sunrise. It becomes, in a way, the heartbeat of the monastery, steady, patient, repeating its heavy note into a darkness that does not answer back. The pace of life in the monastery slows into a contemplative silence. Study continues, but more slowly. Tasks are done with a kind of deliberate care, as if each movement must be felt fully, experienced as an anchor. Feet shuffle along corridors, sandals soft on old stone. Books are opened with a reverence that feels slightly different than before. Not just devotion, but a need to touch something known when the heavens have grown uncertain. Beneath the silence of repetition, there is faith. Not a loud, triumphant faith, but a quiet one. The kind that does not demand the sky to be blue, only to be. The monks gather more often in the chapel. Lamps burn steadily along the walls, halos of light cupped close to their wicks. The icons on the walls glitter faintly in the golden glow. Tiny metal stars embedded in painted halos. They chant, even when there is no difference between night and morning. Their voices rising and falling like gentle tides beneath a frozen shore. The words speak of light and hope and return. They also speak of mystery, of paths hidden from human sight. Whispers tell us that in their dreams, some of them begin to see patterns. Strange spirals of light swirling slowly above the mountains. A veil pulled halfway across the sky, luminous at its edges. A dark disk rimmed in fire. The imagery is not precise, not scientific, but it is insistent. And always, always, there is the sound of the bell. It rings at the hour set long ago, by rules that do not account for a sun that refuses to appear. It rings at the time that used to be dawn, at noon, at dusk, at midnight, marking a cycle that the sky no longer confirms. Its deep voice trembles out into the endless dark, an unending midnight bell. Slowly, the chronicle fills with contradictions. One monk writes, "The darkness has lasted 3 months." Another, on the facing page, notes, "Time is hard to measure." Perhaps it has been only weeks, perhaps longer. I no longer trust my own memory. One entry claims that on a certain day, a faint band of blue appeared along the horizon, like the ghost of a morning. The next entry, written by a different hand, says, "I saw no such band, only stars and the pale stain of aurora." Their records begin to resemble the sky itself. Mysterious, layered, elusive. The world beyond the monastery may one day argue over what truly happened in that winter. Was it ash veiling the sun? Was it the tilt of the earth shifting imperceptibly? Was it a great storm high above, unseen but felt? The monks never know. What they do know is that their bell kept ringing, and that their faith did not fully extinguish, even as the sky forgot to turn blue. In the final movement of our journey here, we slow even further, as though moving through deep snow. Imagine standing in one of the monastery's inner courtyards. The air is so cold, it almost does not feel like air at all. The sky above is dark but not entirely empty. Faint stars scattered like dust. A sluggish ribbon of aurora breathing green at the horizon. Snow covers the ground in a smooth, unbroken layer, reflecting what little light there is. Candles glow in a few narrow windows around you. Their warmth does not reach your skin, but you know it is there, tucked behind glass and stone. Then, from the bell tower, it comes again. A single tone. Then another. Then another. The sound hangs in the air like a question asked gently but firmly. No answer comes from the sky. No sudden flare of light breaks through the clouds. No chorus of angels or cracking of heavens. Only the fading echo of bronze and the soft hiss of the wind against the walls. And yet, in that lack of response, something is revealed. Faith, you realize, is not always the certainty that light will come. Sometimes it is the choice to keep ringing the bell, even when morning does not arrive on the schedule, to keep lighting candles, even when the darkness is not pushed back as far as you had hoped, to keep recording times and dreams and auroras in careful script, even when the meaning of those records is unclear. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood fully. This long winter, this unending midnight. Perhaps its purpose was not to break the world, but to show how people continue, day after night after day, in a universe that does not explain itself. As you drift now toward your own sleep, you might carry with you the image of that monastery clinging to its cliff, the frozen river below, holding the faint reflection of a starless sky, the bell tower standing like a small raised hand against the vastness. Inside, a few small flames burn. Pages turn. Lips move in prayer. Hearts keep time with a rhythm older than day and night. Some voices only echo when we are quiet enough to hear them. Tonight, perhaps, the echo is this. Even when the light withdraws, even when the sky forgets to turn blue, there can be a kind of sacredness in the dark, a gentle, unhurried knowing that we are held in something larger than our understanding, whether or not the dawn chooses to arrive. And so we leave the monastery of the unending midnight bell, its sound fading into the distance, its windows glowing faintly. Its people small against the snow and stone, resting in the soft acceptance that darkness too can be a kind of holy light. It is said that some mysteries do not begin in thunder or in flame, but in the quiet crackle of old paper and the soft rasp of breath in a room that the world has almost forgotten. Imagine, for a moment, an archive. It lies at the back of a stone building whose windows seldom open, in a city that once faced the sea with pride and now merely listens to it with a tired ear. The corridor leading to this archive is narrow and cool, lined with shelves that lean under the weight of rolled scrolls and folded charts. Dust hangs in the air like a faint, unmoving mist, touched only by thin spears of light that slip through high, grimy panes. The door to the archive sighs as it opens, its hinges speaking in a language of age. Inside, the smell deepens. Dust, quiet ink, the faint ghost of old smoke. Along the walls, wooden cabinets and pigeonholes hold the memories of journeys long ago, routes plotted and forgotten, coastlines drawn by trembling hands. On a central table, scarred and stained, a map is unrolled. It does not spread easily. The parchment has grown stiff with time, its edges curled like sleeping leaves. Hands, careful, respectful, gently press the corners flat, placing small weights of stone along the edges. The room holds its breath. Under the greyish light, the map reveals itself. Its surface is stained and frayed, discoloured by years of handling and the subtle touch of damp air. Ink lines trace a coastline that curves and bends like a sleeping serpent, looping in and out of bays and headlands. Tiny suns, no larger than the head of a pin, have been drawn at intervals along that shore, each one with short radiating strokes, as if to mark places where dawn has been faithfully observed, where the first light of morning has met human eyes. But it is in one corner that the map's true secret lies. There, where the coastline stretches thin and then disappears into an uncertain line. A region has been shaded in soft grey, not solidly, but with light, hesitant strokes, as though the cartographer's hand had trembled, unsure how strongly to insist upon its existence. Within that grey shape, in a script that no one alive now speaks, 2 lines of text have been written. Beneath them, in fresher ink from a later hand, someone has translated the phrase, "the place where morning does not rise." The words sit quietly on the page, a small riddle wrapped in dust and time. A hand traces the faint margin of that grey region. Fingers follow the wavering edge, where the known coastline gives way to this shaded uncertainty. Perhaps the hand belongs to a scholar, perhaps to a sailor whose eyes have grown tired of familiar routes, perhaps to someone who has simply grown curious about the edges of things. The question, unspoken, drifts up like a breath. Is this just a myth, sketched as a warning or a story? Is it a mistake, the product of poor observation or frightened imagination? Or does it mark a real shore, some remote stretch of land where the sun lingers below the world's lip, never fully climbing into the sky? The map offers no explanation. It only bears its label soberly, like an old witness who has said all it can. Whispers tell us that once such a question is truly asked, it begins to move. It stirs the air in the archive, rustles the edges of other maps, calls faintly to the sea beyond the city walls. And so we embark. The journey that follows is not one of hurried discovery or triumphant revelation. It is slow and measured, like the turning of the tide, The ship that carries this question out into the world is not a grand vessel of war, but a sturdy, weathered craft that has known both storm and calm. Its hull smells of salt and tar, its ropes frayed but strong, its sails patched in places with cloth that bears the ghost of older colors. Before departure, the map is brought on board with the same care one might give to a fragile relic. It is rolled, tied with a faded ribbon, and placed in a wooden case lined with worn velvet. The navigator opens it in the dim light of the cabin, tracing the serpent coastline, the tiny suns, and finally, that shaded grey corner, the place where morning does not rise. The ship leaves the harbour at dusk, as lamps flicker on along the quay. The water outside the city is a sheet of dull metal, reflecting a sky already leaning toward night. The sails fill with a tired wind, and the vessel slips out into open water, guided by stars that are beginning to awaken. Days, and their blurred edges, begin to pass. The narrator's voice moves with the ship, soft and steady, guiding us through calm waters and veiled fog. The horizon often appears as a faint line, nothing more than a seam between silver waves and a low, dim sky. Sometimes the sea is glass smooth, mirroring the grey above so perfectly that it feels as though the ship is suspended between two identical voids. Sailors, wrapped in cloaks against the chill, speak in half-remembered tales as they work. One claims to have heard of lands far north, where the sun barely rises for months, skimming weakly along the horizon like a tired lantern. Another recalls an old story his grandmother told of a place where dawn and dusk met and never parted, locking the world in a soft, perpetual twilight. There, birds, he says, grew confused and sang at odd hours, their waking songs repeated endlessly. Perhaps this is that place, he murmurs, eyes fixed on the pale boundary between sea and sky. Days blend into one another. The map is consulted often, its surface smoothed beneath calloused hands. The ship drifts not just along the marked coastline, but along that drawn, uncertain edge, the border between the known world and the shaded grey region. As they move further along this line, the crew notice that time seems to lose its sharp edges. Morning, when it comes, is thin and slow. The difference between night and day is not so much a shift as a gradual easing. 1 hour resembles the next. Shadows lack conviction. Sleep and waking blur into something that feels like a long, continuous exhale. They watch the horizon for the moment when the sun should break free. Often it does not. At best, it offers a swelling of brightness behind the clouds, a suggestion of a disk, without clean edge or color. At worst, there is only a vague lifting of darkness into a slightly lighter shade, as though someone has brushed the sky with a damp cloth. Sailors tell new stories, made from what they feel now. They speak of birds that wheel above the ship and seem reluctant to land, as if searching for a familiar signal that never arrives. The sharp gleam of sunrise on the water, the clear line of dawn breaking the horizon. They talk of their own hearts beating slower, their songs fading into half-whispered hums. They say time sleeps in these waters. One of them offers, half serious, half to ease his own unease, marked by the moon, not by the sun. Nights are not truly dark. The sky holds a soft, persistent glow, like embers that refuse to extinguish. Stars sometimes vanish behind a thin, luminous veil, reappearing only faintly. The moon, when it rises, seems both too bright and too distant, as though shining from another universe altogether. Beneath this strange dome, The ship sails onward at last. If at last has meaning in a place where time moves like fog, they see it. A coast of dark cliffs. The land appears first as a shadow, a jagged interruption in the sameness of sea and sky. As they draw closer, its features sharpen. The cliffs are steep, nearly vertical, black rock streaked with lighter veins. At their feet lies a narrow strip of shore covered in pale black sand, a color that seems, impossibly, both ash and pearl. Foam from small waves leaves fleeting white traces, drawn and erased, as if the tide were thinking out loud. The light here is different. It does not fall in clear shafts, nor does it vanish entirely. It hovers. The world is not night, but not truly day. The sky is an endless gradient of muted grey, dark at the zenith and barely silver near the horizon. The cliffs cast shadows, yet those shadows do not deepen. They simply stain the air around them, subtle and insistent. When the crew steps onto the shore, their boots sink into sand that is cool, not cold. The air holds a faint scent of salt and something metallic, like old coins. The wind moves quietly, brushing their faces like the touch of tired fingers. They look for signs. Are there ruins here? Crumbled foundations half buried in sand, fragments of walls, forgotten stairways carved into the rock. Perhaps a stone stele, its surface marked with symbols worn almost flat by time and weather. Perhaps an altar facing a horizon that does not know how to brighten. The story does not say exactly. It is careful not to fix too many details. Some things are left veiled, buried in words like maybe and it is thought. What they do find are scattered signs, like hints in a dream, strange tides that rise and fall at irregular intervals, pockets of the sea that glow faintly, not with the cold blue of ordinary phosphorescence, but with a pale, uncertain gold, as if reflecting a sun hidden deep below the surface. Birds that circle far overhead without ever committing to land, their wings catching some invisible radiance that does not reach the ground. At times, a distant glow becomes visible far out to sea, a low, luminous band that might be dawn or dusk, or something that never fully chooses between the two. It remains on the edge of vision, never rising, never fading completely, as though the horizon itself is holding onto a secret. They stay only as long as they dare, or as long as the story allows them. No clear answer is found. No inscription on a stone explains why this coast might lie in a world where morning does not fully arrive. No old woman appears to tell them the forgotten history of a land cursed or blessed with perpetual twilight. The sky remains undecided, the light hovering, the cliffs standing as silent witnesses. And so, with the same slow care with which they came, they leave. The ship turns away from the cliffs, its prow cutting once more into the muted sea. The coast recedes, shrinking back into shadow, then into memory. The question that brought them here has not been solved. It has only changed shape. The map, when next opened in the cabin, bears new marks. Someone has added small notations along the shaded region's edge. A tiny spiral near the cliff line, a dot where the strange glow was seen, and a brief word in the margin. Tides irregular, light hovering. No sunrise, no full night. The hand that writes these notes does so with care, but no longer with any expectation of closure. The label, however, the place where morning does not rise, remains. No line is drawn through it. No correction is made. To the map, and to those who now have seen that coast of dark cliffs and pale black sand, the phrase feels sufficient. Not accurate, perhaps. Not entirely literal, but true in a way that maps alone cannot measure. Time, with its softened edges, carries us back. The journey home is quicker in the telling than in the living. The sea's greyness begins slowly to break. Horizons grow sharper. Dawn resumes its more familiar pattern, arriving in a clearer progression of colours. Birds sing at the right hours again, as if relieved to find themselves on a more certain schedule. Lanterns at the harbour burn bright against the night when the ship returns, a more ordinary dark that yields, predictably, to morning. We find ourselves once more in the dim archive. The map rests again on the central table, its new notations drying slowly in the dust-scented air. The hand that once traced the outline of the grey region now moves more gently, almost respectfully along its edge. There is no attempt to erase it, no impulse to sharpen its boundary or fill it in with confident lines. Instead, after a long pause, the map is rolled up once more, its creases folding in the faint record of what was seen and what remained unseen. It is tied with the same faded ribbon and slid back into its place among other charts and scrolls, where it will sleep until curious fingers find it again. Perhaps it was never meant to be more than this, a reminder that not all edges of the world are meant to be claimed, labelled, and brought under certainty. Some borders are thresholds, soft and shifting, where day does not quite begin, and night does not quite end. Places where light hovers, undecided. Places where our desire to know must share space with our willingness to simply witness. As you drift now toward your own edge of day, your own private horizon between waking and sleep, you might imagine that shaded region on the old map, a grey corner labelled in a forgotten tongue, the place where morning does not rise. You may never go there in body. You may never need to. It is enough, perhaps, to know that such places exist in the world, in history, in the quiet corners of the mind. Some voices only echo when we have stopped demanding answers. Tonight, let that echo be this, that there are coasts we approach not to conquer, but to acknowledge. Shores where we stand for a moment in the hovering light, feeling the world breathe between night and day. And then gently turn away, leaving the mystery intact, like a folded map tied with a faded ribbon, resting in the deep, patient silence of the archive. It is said that in certain cities, you can still feel the breath of the sky moving through stone. Imagine an old city of spires and narrow streets, built in layers like the rings of a tree. Its foundations are older than memory. Its newest rooftops already dusted by time. The streets below are paved with pale, worn stones polished by countless footsteps. Balconies lean toward one another like old neighbors. And high above, towers rise with quiet determination, lifting windows and bells and weathered flags toward the slow-turning heavens. In the heart of this city, among tiled roofs the color of clay and faded copper, stands a lone tower. It is not the tallest, nor the most ornate, but it stands a little apart, set onto the corner of a small square where a stone fountain whispers day and night. The tower's base is solid, built of thick grey blocks, its walls scarred by the centuries. Winding inside it, like a hidden coil of breath, is a staircase of narrow steps, each one gently hollowed by use. At the very top, Just beneath the pointed roof, the tower opens into a small chamber of glass. The room is simple. No throne, no altar, no court. Only a wooden table, a high stool, shelves stacked with notebooks and loose sheets, and the gentle clutter of a life spent in patient watching. Vials of ink, feathers trimmed to sharp quills, small boxes for lenses, cloths for polishing. The walls are ringed with windows, their panes a little wavy with age, each one holding a piece of the sky. It is here that an observer of the heavens has chosen to keep his vigil. In this chamber he has built a simple device, a tube of polished wood, long and narrow, fitted at either end with carefully ground lenses. It is not a grand instrument, nothing like the gleaming machines that will one day map the cosmos, but it is enough. Enough to gather the light of the sun and tame it, to soften its fierce blaze, and lay its image gently upon a small circle where it can be studied without burning the eye. Our chapter opens on a hazy afternoon. The city below is bathed in a thin washed light. The air is heavy with a pale mist that softens the edges of chimneys and steeples, blurring far roofs into a watercolor of muted reds and greys. Laundry hangs in narrow alleys, hardly stirring. A bell tolls somewhere in the distance, its sound drifting up like a question. In the glass chamber, the observer lifts his instrument. He has done this so many times that his hands move almost without thought. He adjusts the angle, aligning the wooden tube with the sun's position in the sky. He narrows the shutters on one window to control the incoming light. On the table, a simple screen waits, a flat surface where the sun's face will appear done, reduced and gentled, bright but bearable. He expects, as always, to see a familiar sight, a flawless disk, a perfect, round coin of light, smooth, unblemished, whole. And at first, that is what greets him. A bright circle blooms on the screen, edged with a soft halo. But as his eyes adjust, as he leans in and lets the image steady, he notices them, tiny dark stains, specks scattered across the sun's radiant face like ash upon a golden coin. He blinks, adjusts the focus. The dots remain. They are not on the lens, for when he moves the tube, they move with the image. They are not on the screen. He wipes it clean, and the spots return in the same places, clinging to the sun's projected surface. He has read, in old scrolls smudged with the dust of other hands, hints of such things, obscure notes about spots on the solar body, dismissed as errors or illusions. Perhaps he expected someday to see them, yet the moment they appear before him is still quietly unsettling. The sun, which the city has always imagined as pure and spotless, carries shadow on its skin. Day by day he watches. The hazy afternoon becomes another and another. Each time the sky is clear enough, he climbs the tower stairs, breath soft and steady, and prepares his device. On the table, the circle of light appears. Within it, the dark specks shift. They are no longer identical to the ones he first saw. Some of them have moved. Some have grown larger, widening like ink dropped into water. Some have merged, forming irregular shapes, tiny bruises on the shining disk. Others have faded entirely. He takes notes in a careful hand, the scratch of quill on paper almost the only sound in the high room. He draws the circle over and over again, tracing the shifting shadows upon it, marking the date, the hour, the clarity of the air. His notebook fills with suns, each one slightly different from the last. Below, in the streets, people begin to murmur. Mornings that should be bright feel strangely dim. The light that falls between the buildings is weaker, cooler, as though passing through a veil. Women leaning from windows to shake blankets notice that the shadows of the laundry are shorter than they remember. Men lifting crates in the marketplace pause to rub at their arms, surprised by the chill in the air even when the sky appears white and open. Whispers drift through taverns and bakeries, across church porches and near the wells. The days are colder. The sun is pale. The seasons have turned wrong. Some remember childhood mornings when sunlight seemed to pour into the streets like warm honey. This new light feels thin, as if it has been strained, slowed, drawn from a weary source. Rumors, as they always do, take on shapes. Some suspect an omen. Perhaps the heavens are displeased. Perhaps the city has sinned, and the sun is withdrawing its favor little by little. Others, more cautious, say the sun is ill, covered in bruises of shadow, its great face blemished by some celestial sickness. Children hear scraps of these ideas and carry them further. In narrow lanes, they play at being the sun, smearing charcoal on their cheeks and pretending to stagger across the sky. Laughter mixes with unease, and the stories sink deeper into the city's soil. Up in the tower, the observer records all this in his own quiet way. He listens to the rumors when he goes down for bread or ink. He notes the usual chill, the reports of crops that ripen late, the complaints of old bones that ache more than usual. He hears a woman say, "The morning does not warm the stones as it used to," and writes the phrase down, underlining it twice. But he does not rush to explain. Instead, he sends letters. At his desk, by the narrow window that faces the west, he unrolls clean sheets of paper. The ink, dark as midnight, glistens on his quill. With measured strokes, he writes to colleagues in distant lands. Other watchers of the sky, other keepers of simple lenses and patient notebooks. He asks them, "Do you see what I see? Does your sun too grow spots of shadow?" His letters travel by horse and by ship, tucked into saddlebags and strongboxes, crossing mountain passes and quiet seas. Time passes, measured in the fading and reappearing of the dark specks on his screen. Then, slowly, replies begin to return. Their seals are cracked open in the quiet of the glass chamber. Their edges are sometimes damp from the sea, sometimes blurred where a hand has gripped them too tightly. The ink in these letters often smudges, as though written in anxious haste. "Yes," they say. "Yes, we see them too." From the north, a scholar writes of a disc mottled with marks, like burns on a lamp's shade. From the south, another speaks of wandering islands of darkness on the face of the sun. A third, from beyond a wide river, confesses that he first thought his instrument flawed, his glass cracked, but found no fault in either. Their words, different yet similar, draw a web across the world. The phenomenon is not local. The shadowed spots are not a trick of weather or gaze. Yet no one can say for certain what they mean. Are these dark islands the cause of the weakened light, storms raging on the surface of the star that feeds their days? Or are they only a reflection, some symptom of a deeper change, the visible side of an invisible shift? No one knows. The observer's journal swells with entries. The pages carry not only drawings of the sun, but also small human gestures. The lens needed polishing today. Dust glimmered in the beam like tiny planets. The streets below were unusually quiet at noon. People stayed indoors, as if waiting for something to be announced. A child in the square asked his mother if the sun could fall from the sky. We moved gently between the tower and the city, as if walking up and down the invisible thread that connects them. In the tower, we watched the turning of a page, the delicate adjustment of a lens, the way a shaft of daylight, pale but determined, cuts across the floorboards, lighting up motes of dust that dance in the air like tiny worlds. The observer's hand steadies the wooden tube. His eye aligns with the projection. His breath slows. Each speck on the sun's face is given attention, recorded, honored. In the streets, we drift past doorways and windows. We see candles lit earlier than usual, their small flames defying the grey afternoon. We hear merchants complain that their produce looks dull under such light, that no colour gleams as it once did. We notice dogs sleeping longer in doorways, cats blinking more slowly in patchy sun. At night, the city's spires pierce a sky that seems to think twice before darkening fully. Sometimes strange streaks of light sweep faintly across the stars, as though the earth itself is being brushed by unseen fingers. Sometimes the moon, marked by its own ancient scars, looks down on rooftops and narrow lanes that no longer trust the simple rhythm of day and night. The chapter's pace remains slow, reverent. We are not here to diagnose, to dissect, to insist. We are here to feel, alongside those distant hearts, the unease of realizing that even the brightest things we know can change their face. In time, the dark specks on the sun begin to fade. They shrink, retreating into the shimmering brightness until, on some afternoons, the circle on the screen appears almost unblemished again. The light in the streets grows stronger, though it never quite returns to its old, unquestioned generosity. People remark that the chill lessens. Children squint more in the mornings, laundry dries a little faster on the lines. But the memory of the shadows remains, where memory fades into story, whispers fill the space. Some call it the year the sun grew sick. Others describe it as a time when the heavens closed their eyes for a while. For the observer in the tower, it becomes a chapter in his journals, written carefully, without drama, wrapped in margins of quiet doubt. And so we come to the final image. One afternoon, after many months of watching, of writing, of reading letters from afar, the observer climbs the narrow staircase once more. The air in the chamber is cool but calm. Dust rests gently on the windowsills. The instrument stands ready on its wooden supports. Lenses cleaned, wood polished by constant touch. Outside, the sky is lightly veiled by a thin layer of cloud, not heavy enough to hide the sun, but enough to soften its presence. Out of habit, he raises the tube, aligns it, watches the projected disc appear. Today, the image is almost featureless, a bright blurred circle with no clear spots. He studies it a moment, then lowers the device. For once, he sets it aside. He steps to the window and looks at the sun with unarmed eyes, not directly, but through the thin cloud, which turns it into a pale, diffuse glow. It is no longer a coin, no longer a perfect shape. It is a soft blur, a luminous stain on the sky, its edges fading into the grey around it. He narrows his eyes, then lets them relax. There are no visible spots now, no clear islands of shadow, only a sense deep and quiet that he has seen something most will never notice, and that even this seeing has limits. He returns to his desk, opens his journal, and writes a final line for this chapter. Perhaps he says, "The spots are gone." Perhaps he says, "Today the sun appears smooth again, though I know better than to call it flawless." Perhaps he simply notes the date and then stops. He closes the journal. His hand rests on its cover for a moment, feeling the texture of the leather, the slight swelling where pages have been filled with ink and thought. The tower is still. The city murmurs faintly below. The sky, with all its secrets, continues its slow turning. And you, listening now, are invited to dwell in this soothing uncertainty, to remember that even the brightest star we know, a star that orders our days and seasons, that shines on our roofs and rivers, that warms our skin and grows our food, may carry mysteries on its surface that we are meant only to glimpse, never to fully understand. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, let this be one of them, the quiet voice of a lone tower above an old city, a simple wooden tube, a circle of light on a table, and small shifting spots of shadow that came and went, reminding those who watch that nothing in the heavens is as fixed as it seems, and that there is a gentle, necessary peace in letting some questions remain unanswered as you drift softly into sleep. It is said that there was once a year when the day forgot how to shine. Not all at once, and not with any great announcement. There was no trumpet in the clouds, no sudden rending of the sky. The change came quietly, like dust settling on a windowsill, like ash on the tongue of the wind. We begin in a small village. It sits in a shallow valley, held gently between low hills. Once, the fields around it were sheets of gold under a generous sun. Wheat and barley bending in warm breezes, the air humming with insects and birdsong. At noon, the world would gleam. Shadows would stand sharp and precise at people's feet. Stone walls would radiate heat, and children would squint and laugh, chasing one another across courtyards too bright to look at for long. But this year is different. The chapter opens at what should be midday. A bell has just struck 12 times from the small chapel at the village's heart, its sound wandering out over the roofs and fields. People pause in their work out of habit. A woman straightens up from the wash basin, rubbing her lower back. A farmer leans on his hoe at the edge of his field. Two children stop their game with a homemade ball and look up. They expect warmth on their faces. They expect to half close their eyes against the glare. Instead, the light that lies over the village is weak and strange. The sky above is the color of cooled embers, no longer aflame, but still holding some tired memory of fire. A grey pall stretches from horizon to horizon, thin yet stubborn, like the residue of some ancient smoke that refuses to clear. Color beneath it are muted. The green of the fields dulled to sage, the red of a shawl faded to rust, the blue of a door washed into a weary grey. Birdsong is quieter. It is as if the birds themselves are unsure what time it is, their usual midday chorus muffled, scattered, replaced by hesitant notes that drift like questions. Somewhere far away, beyond the knowledge of this village, beyond the curve of their hills, a mountain has torn itself open and breathed a vast cloud of invisible dust into the heavens. It has sent ash and fine particles high into the sky, where winds have carried them across oceans and continents, weaving a thin gauze between the earth and the sun. But here, in this valley, the villagers do not know that. They only know that their days feel like late evening, even when the clock insists it is noon. The crops struggle in the pale glow, leaves trembling on stalks that reach for a warmth that never quite arrives. The earth stays cool beneath the surface. Seeds hesitate. They mark this as the year when noon turned to ash. On doorframes and bread loaves, in stories told at night, in the way they shake their heads and gesture at the dim sky, the phrase settles. The year noon turned to ash, they say. And though none of them know the shape of the distant mountain that exhaled this shadow, they all feel its breath. We drift away from the village, as gently as smoke rising from a chimney, and cross the invisible lines that divide lands from one another. In another place, far to the west, there is a city of canals and stone bridges, where a painter stands before a window with a brush poised in mid-air. He has spent years studying the colors of sunset on the water, the way gold melts into rose and rose into violet. Yet lately, the evenings have changed. The sun sinks behind low, ash-veiled clouds, and the sky erupts into strange copper and bruised purple. The water below does not reflect clear shapes, but a smeared, metallic glow, as if someone has poured molten metal into the veins of the river. He dips his brush, hesitates. How to name this color? It is not the gentle warmth of past summers, nor the clean blaze of an ordinary red sunset. It is something else, something that feels both beautiful and uneasy. He lays it down on the canvas anyway. Stroke by stroke, he paints a sky that looks like a healing wound. In a town of poets and scholars to the south, a writer sits hunched over a scrap of paper by lamplight, although the hour is still midday. Outside, the sky is once again the dull color of old pewter. Light seeps in through the window like a reluctant guest. He writes of a sun that seems to fall short of the earth, as if it begins its daily journey with good intentions, but grows weary before its halfway mark. He writes of days that never fully arrive, of mornings that seem to hesitate at the threshold, of evenings that stretch out their fingers far into the hours once claimed by noon. The poem is not precise. It does not speak of dust or eruption or numbers. It speaks instead of feelings, of time off balance, of shadows that refuse to stand up straight, of hearts that cannot quite wake. In villages and cities alike, children grow used to playing under a bruised sky. They kick balls and chase each other in streets that wear a permanent twilight. Their faces do not gleam with the same crisp brightness their parents remember from childhood. Their games stretch later into what should be night, because the line between afternoon and evening has blurred. Lanterns and candles are lit earlier, their flames flickering against the ashen backdrop. Chronicles speak of unusual frosts. In fields that should be safe from freezing, thin veils of ice appear overnight, delicate and sharp, decorating young leaves that were not meant to endure such cold. Gardens suffer. Vineyards produce fewer smaller grapes. Fruit remains hard and sour on the branch. Farmers note the dates in almanacs, their ink strokes tight and worried. Frost on the first day of harvest month, one writes, never before. Lamps are lit at midday. In monasteries and scriptoria, where scribes bend over thick books, the light from high windows no longer suffices. Candles are placed closer to the pages. The pages themselves are touched by small halos of gold, the letters shining dark against the glow. Outside, silhouettes move in a washed-out world. Inside, words and ink and flame create tiny islands of clarity. People wake and sleep confused. Roosters crow not once but several times, unsure when truly to announce the day. Some crow when the sky merely lightens by a shade, then fall silent when no brightness follows. Others do not crow at all, as if waiting for a cue that never comes. Human bodies too struggle to find their rhythm. Some wake too early, disturbed by the endless half-light. Others oversleep, their minds tricked by the absence of a decisive dawn. Time, which once felt like a circle, marked cleanly by sun and shadow, now feels like a loop drawn with a shaking hand. And yet, alongside hardship, there is a quiet kind of beauty. In many places, the air carries a softness that was never there before. The sun, filtered through its gauze of dust, throws halos around itself, gentle rings of pale light in the sky. Even the moon sometimes wears a thin crown, marked by the scattered crystals of the high cloud. At certain hours, halos also appear around lanterns and lamp flames, little circles of brightness wrapped in a faint iridescence. The world seems to glow from within, as if covered in a veil of powdered glass. Nights, when they finally fall, are filled with more stars than before. The same dust that dims the daylight scatters sunlight elsewhere, leaving the darkness clearer, sharper, rinsed. On cloudless nights, the heavens spill out with impossible clarity. The Milky Way is no longer a rumor, but a glowing river arcing from horizon to horizon, star-marked and endless. In quiet fields, people lie on their backs, breath leaving white traces in the cold air, staring up at this new, startling ceiling. For a little while, they almost forget the ashen noon, the earthbound worries of crops and clocks, caught instead in the dizzying sight of a sky that looks deeper and more crowded with fire than they have ever seen. Some say that beneath the silence of that dim year, the earth itself was catching its breath. Long after the dust has settled and the sunlight has returned to its former strength, historians argue. They study rings in ancient trees that show stunted growth. They examine cores of ice pulled from glacier and mountain, counting thin layers of ash. They compare dates of famines and strange frosts, notes in ship captains' logs about sunsets of unnatural color, scribbles in the margins of prayer books about a year of grey days and long nights. Numbers are offered, theories are proposed. A mountain name is written and underlined. Air currents are traced. Charts are drawn, their lines pointing to a conclusion. The year noon turned to ash was the work of geology, of physics, of a single great exhalation from deep beneath the Earth's crust. And perhaps they are right. But the chapter we are telling tonight does not rest on the numbers. It floats instead on the human memory of that dim season, on the way it felt to live under a sky like cooled embers. It remembers the painter's hesitant brush, trying to capture a copper light that seemed both ominous and beautiful. It remembers the poet's ink, describing the sun as a tired traveler falling short of its destination. It remembers the children, playing in streets that never quite brightened, growing up with a different understanding of day and night, a softer, blurrier boundary. It remembers the farmers rubbing frost from leaves in months when frost should have been a stranger. It remembers the quiet awe of star-watching nights, where the heavens seemed to lean closer than before. And it remembers especially the small lights that people kindled when the great light grew thin. As we come toward the end of our wandering, the scene narrows again, returning to the scale of a single house, in a single village, on a single ashen noon. The sky outside is once more the familiar dull grey, with that strange, unsteady brightness that never quite wins. The fields are there, the hills, the bare lattice of trees waiting for spring. The bell has struck midday, though the light would not have told you so. In the window of a modest cottage, a single candle burns. Its flame is quiet but steady. It has no awareness of planetary shadows or volcanic dust. It simply stands, a tongue of living fire, drawing fuel from its wick and wax, offering warmth and light to the room behind the glass. On the other side of that window, the ashen noon presses close, dimming the world. The candle's glow pushes back only a small distance, just enough to warm the sill, just enough to touch the outline of a clay cup, a folded cloth, a hand resting nearby. It is not much, and yet, in that moment, it holds the shape of hope. It whispers, without words, that light does not have to be vast to be meaningful, that even when the great sun itself is veiled and weakened, small flames can rise, can take its place for a while in the hearts and homes of those who live beneath it. Perhaps, in the far future, the exact measurements of that dim year will blur. Numbers will be debated, causes refined. The name of the mountain may be forgotten by many, but somewhere in the soft archives of memory, the feeling will remain. A season when noon turned to ash, and people learned to notice not only the absence of brightness, but the presence of every small glow that remained. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, perhaps, it is the voice of that single candle on the windowsill, burning under an ashen noon, reminding you as you drift towards sleep that even when the great light weakens, there are smaller lights, steadier, closer, tenderer, that can guide you through the dimness, one breath, one moment, one gentle day at a time. It is said that in a certain city, long before electric light tamed the night, there was a hall where time itself was invited to sit and be measured. The hall was vast and dim, its walls built of stone that remembered centuries of footsteps and whispers. Tall arched windows rose along its sides, their panes of glass tinted faintly blue, so that the moonlight entering felt like water spilled upon the floor. The air smelled of wax and metal, of dust and old parchment, of breath held and released in quiet awe. At the center of this hall, beneath a great painted dome, stood the clock. It was not like the small, obedient clocks that ticked in kitchens and parlors. Those modest tools that merely told people when to eat, when to pray, when to sleep. This clock was an instrument of the heavens, an astral machine. Its body was a cathedral of brass and steel, gears as large as cartwheels meshed with cogs no bigger than a fingernail. Polished rods and shafts gleamed faintly in the low light. The whole construction rose like a mechanical tree, its branches made not of wood, but of interlocking rings and delicate arms that turned with a slow and careful grace. Above it, on the inner surface of the dome, the sky had been painted. Constellations stretched across deep blue, each star picked out in gold leaf, each figure, lion, archer, serpent, maiden, traced with patient hands. Between them arced thin paths, lines showing the long wanderings of planets, the tilt of the earth, the great invisible patterns that tie night and day together. The clock did more than mark hours. It traced the dance of those distant lights. It calculated the rising and setting of the sun, the moon's slow phases, the lean of the seasons. A forest of pointers spread across its broad face, some short, some slender, some sweeping the full width of the dial. Each one was devoted to a different rhythm, one to the hour of the night, another to the path of Mars, another to the length of the day itself, growing and shrinking as winter yielded to summer and back again. Beneath the silence of this intricate motion lay a belief that if one could only observe carefully enough, measure precisely enough, chart faithfully enough, the sky's mysteries would become predictable, knowable, safe. Our chapter begins on a particular night. Scholars and dreamers have gathered in the grand hall, their footsteps echoing softly as they file in under the painted constellations. Cloaks and robes rustle. Candles are lit in tall iron stands, their flames trembling in tiny halos. The air hums with a kind of reverent anticipation, like the moment before a book is opened or a curtain is drawn. For decades, the clock has whispered of this night. Its makers, long ago, crafted gears and cams that would respond to a rare alignment, a meeting of planets in one narrow slice of sky, a configuration foretold in old scrolls. The mechanism has been slowly walking toward this moment, tooth by tooth, tick by tick, through years and years of unnoticed time. At last, the appointed night has arrived. The scholars carry notebooks with worn leather covers. Their hands are ink-stained. Many of them are old now, faces lined by years spent squinting at stars and tracing spirals in dust. They have waited half a lifetime to see if their calculations were correct. The dreamers, the poets, the mystics, the quiet ones who come simply to feel, stand in the shadows between the pillars. Heads tilted back, eyes moving between the painted dome and the slow, gleaming clock below. The hall's doors are closed. The city outside fades into a hush of distant footsteps and the occasional call of someone heading home. Inside, all attention is fixed on the great machine. The mechanisms within the clock murmur and turn. Wheels engage. Chains slide over teeth. Delicate levers tremble, then settle. On the wide dial, one by one, pointers glide toward the positions they have been destined to occupy tonight. At a precise moment, a thin, star-shaped hand reaches the mark inscribed for this rare configuration. This alignment, this pattern of distant fires. A soft sigh moves through the hall. But this is only the prelude. The true test will come with the morning, for the alignment does not end with the night. It is said that at dawn, the sun itself will rise at a slightly altered angle, its path across the sky shifted by the celestial gathering. The clock, calibrated to the oldest calculations, is supposed to register this change with exquisite precision. The scholars settle into long wooden benches along the walls, some resting their heads in their hands, others muttering last-minute figures under their breath. A few remain awake all night, listening to the low music of the machine, following the slow creep of the stars painted above and the gentle movements of the pointer arms below. The candles burn down. The moon slips behind clouds. The hall grows colder. At last, the time approaches. Dawn, by all ordinary measures, should be near. There is, upon the clock's face, a special indicator, a slender arm pointing to a small scale etched with symbols of night and morning. It treads the fine border between dark and light, advancing with the subtlety of a whisper. When it reaches a certain mark, the scholars have always known, the sun will break the horizon, unseen behind the stone walls, but declared with confidence by their astral machine. Tonight, all eyes turn to that pointer. The gears that govern it stir. The weight that drives it shifts minutely. The arm begins to move. inching toward the sign of sunrise carved at the edge of night. And then the mechanism shudders. A faint tremor runs through the brass ribs of the clock, a hesitation like a breath held in a human chest. The pointer, poised just before the mark of morning, slows. It lingers. The scholars are still. The pointer hangs there, stubborn, trembling, but not advancing, as though some invisible hand has touched it and said, "Not yet." In the high windows, a faint grey light has begun to seep through the glass. The dome above is no longer swallowed entirely down in darkness. The painted constellations soften, sheltered in a dim twilight. By ordinary eyes, dawn is coming. The world beyond this hall is already shrugging off the thickest cloak of night. But on the clock's face, morning has not yet arrived. We step softly into the confusion that follows, careful not to raise our voice. Those who built their trust into this astral machine rise from their benches as if waking from a dream. Their footsteps sound too loud in the hush. Ink-stained hands clutch notebooks. Eyes glance quickly from the pointer to the windows, from the mechanism to the painted dome and back again. The oldest of them, whose hair has turned the color of spider silk, moves closer to the clock. His palm rests on the cool brass, feeling for something wrong. A halt in the heartbeat of gears, a stiffness in the motion. Others gather tools, small wrenches, brushes, bottles of oil. They open brass panels cautiously, revealing the hidden tangle of wheels and springs inside. The clock's internal world, usually private, now lies exposed, glinting in the dim light. They check its springs, its wheels, its delicate teeth, dusted with oil and time. No gear is broken. No spring has snapped. A tooth is missing from the great wheels that have spun faithfully for decades. The internal rhythm of the machine is, as far as they can tell, intact. And yet, when they look back at the dial, the pointer that should have crossed into morning remains fixed on the edge of night. Outside, the faint grey grows slightly brighter. Somewhere beyond the walls, rooftops and chimneys are emerging from shadow. Birds are beginning to move in their nests. The city is preparing for day, even if the sun, filtered through a veil of thin cloud and distant dust, is slow to show its face. Inside, the clock insists that dawn has not properly arrived. Whispers swell and fade along the edges of the hall. Has the sky drifted from its old pattern? Has something shifted in the dance of planets, in the tilt of the earth, in the unseen gears of the cosmos? Or has the clock revealed something instead of failing? Perhaps this year's dawn is only a thin imitation of the real thing. Perhaps, measured against some older, purer light, this morning does not quite qualify. Only a grey imitation, a half-hearted beginning. Old notebooks are brought out from cabinets and shelves. They are opened with the care given to fragile relics. Their pages smell of dust and ink, their edges browned. By the flicker of lamps, the scholars read their own handwriting from decades past, and that of those who came before them. They find entries they had long forgotten, a discrepancy of some minutes between predicted dawn and observed light. This was dismissed as weather. Sunrise indicator slightly late today. No obvious mechanical fault. Recorded, but not investigated further. On 3 occasions this year, the morning pointer hesitated at the border despite clear skies. Consider recalibration. Small anomalies, politely ignored in eras when the differences seemed too small to disturb certainty. discrepancies smoothed over with phrases like margin of error and likely atmospheric interference. Now, with the pointer visibly refusing to cross the threshold, these tiny notes gather weight. Beneath the silence, a realization begins to form. What seemed precise was always slightly uncertain. Not only the clock, with its human-made gears and rods, but the sky itself, with its subtle variations, its storms of light and darkness, its habit of not quite doing the same thing twice. Some suggest that the clock must be adjusted, its scales refined, its springs retensioned, its calculations updated to match the new behavior of the heavens. Others are hesitant. If they adjust too quickly, will they erase the record of something meaningful? A shift in the world that deserves to be noticed rather than erased? If they rush to bring the pointer back into agreement with their expectations, will they miss the quiet message that this hesitation carries? Still the pointer lingers at the edge. The faint grey at the windows grows no brighter. Morning today is thin and half-hearted, a washed-out approximation. We linger over these pages, these conversations, these slow movements of hands across polished brass. The narrator's gaze rests on the small gestures, the way dust glimmers in a thin beam of daylight striking the clock's rim, the way a scholar's finger trembles slightly as it traces an old entry noting 5 minutes too late, the way a quill pauses above a blank space before writing for the first time, the clock refused to declare the dawn. Outside, rumors move through the city, carried from mouth to ear, from doorway to market stall. Some say the great clock has broken. Others say it has finally told the truth. The morning is not what it used to be, one woman mutters, wrapping her shawl tighter. Perhaps the clock is the only thing honest enough to admit it. In this tapestry of quiet doubt, the chapter draws toward its close. The clock remains standing in the center of the hall, tall and intricate, its gears still turning. The other hands continue to move, the one that measures hours, the one that tracks the moon's slow journey, the one that shows the creeping of the seasons. The music of metal and motion persists, unbroken. Only the morning indicator is forever a little late. In later years, visitors will come to the hall and stand beneath the painted dome, listening to guides explain the marvels of the astral clock. Their eyes will follow the sweep of the many pointers, their minds straining to grasp all the cycles captured in this mechanical forest. Some will notice that one slender arm always seems to lag, its tip hovering just at the edge of dawn, as if reluctant to declare the day fully begun. If they ask why, they may be told different stories. Some will say it is a flaw never repaired. Others will say it is a memorial to a strange year, when the sun refused to rise in the way people expected. Still others will smile and say, it reminds us that even our finest instruments are only careful guesses in the dark. As you drift now toward your own border between waking and sleep, you might hold this image gently in your mind. A grand hall of gears and polished brass. A dome painted with constellations, their gold edges softened by faint morning light. An enormous clock, still ticking, still turning, tracing the dance of planets and the tilt of the earth. And upon its face, a single slender pointer, paused forever a little late at the edge of morning, as if listening for a more certain light that never quite arrives. Perhaps the year the sun refused to rise was never a single event, but a recurring whisper, moving through centuries and hearts, reminding us that certainty is a comfort, not a law, and that part of living under the sky is learning to rest peacefully inside the gentle mystery of not quite knowing.